Foundations might try to destroy our country, as Alger, Hiss, and Harry Dexter White were trying to destroy it. Nearly all the foundations are influenced by those who seek to destroy our country. Whose? Who? How? I don't feel like naming names, so I won't. But these men often command and use money paid to the government in taxes. The Liberty side is out-financed 1,000 to 1. You are often credited with financing a great number of right-wing groups. What political groups do you help support? None. I have made contributions to persons running for office when I thought they were running against someone pretty bad. I donate to individuals rather than to groups. You were a friend of the late Senator Joseph R. McCarthy. Did you ever support him financially? No, I was reported to have done so, but I did not. Were you in sympathy with his views? I was very much in favor of his opposition to communism. Do you disagree with those who claim that McCarthy was irresponsible in his charges and destroyed reputations on the basis of inadequate evidence? I highly approve of anyone dedicated to opposing and fighting communism. I do not pick minor faults they may have, nor do I quarrel with their methods. When someone is accused of pro-communism, his reputation is not endangered unless he is pro-communist. If he is not guilty and really loves his country, the falsity of that appellation will amplify his true worth and redound to his credit. McCarthy himself was smeared a great deal. He was called, for example, a stooge of Facts Forum, a group I helped support. At the same time, Facts Forum was called a front for McCarthy. Actually, McCarthy appeared on Facts Forum programs once or twice, whereas liberal Senator Sparkman of Alabama was on about 24 times. If we had men in the Senate today like Pat McCarran and Joe McCarthy, South Vietnam would not be in such bad shape, because they would have kept the Senate and the nation constantly alerted to the communist menace in that part of the world. Years ago, when we should have known what was coming there. You became actively involved in national politics in 1951 with Facts Forum and other projects. You were in your 60s then. Why didn't you start when you were younger? When I was a cotton planter in Arkansas, I made the trip all the way to Illinois to vote for Teddy Roosevelt for president. That was when I was 23. So I guess I have been interested in public affairs for quite some time now. As I became older and maybe wiser, I became increasingly concerned about losing our freedoms. So I have tried hard to help halt that trend. What freedoms have we lost? I have no prosecution complex and no inclination to recite freedoms I have lost. Nearly anyone who has reached the age of reason can name many freedoms he is losing. Among them, the right to contract. How is the right to contract being lost? Ask some people you know in business, they'll tell you. What will they tell us? We are also losing the right to keep a fair share of the money we earn and a fair share of the profits we make. Wage earners pay about 80% of the personal income taxes and Social Security taxes collected by the government. Let's discuss income taxes and Social Security later. You said you've tried to help halt the trend toward lost freedom. How? I have constructively campaigned against communism since 1933. I succeeded in a one-man campaign to get the states to ratify the No Third Term Amendment, 22nd Amendment, the only amendment ratified 4 years after it had been submitted to the state legislators. I started Facts Forum, as you mentioned, to which TV and radio gave $5 million of free time per year. Facts Forum carried debates between outstanding national figures and was aired on two-thirds of the TV stations in existence at the time. Senators Sparkman, Kefauver, Humphrey, and Kennedy appeared on Facts Forum. The pro-communists complained bitterly about this series, which presented both sides of public affairs issues. Facts Forum was the predecessor of Lifeline, which presents religious and public affairs programs and adheres closely to the constructive side. I have also written some books: Alpaca, Fabian's Fight, Freedom, Why Not Speak, and Hunt for Truth, a collection of my newspaper columns. I also write columns for dailies and weeklies. How would you label yourself politically? I am a registered Democrat who often votes Republican. What would you call yourself? A middle-of-the-roader? A conservative? I'm a conservative. What's that? A conservative is simply someone who is trying to do the best that can be done in public affairs and elsewhere. You really don't consider yourself a conservative? Most people do. Not a particle. The word conservative puts a weight around the necks of our liberty side. What do you mean by liberty? Freedom for the individual to do whatever he likes, consistent with organized society and good taste. Now about the word conservative, I think it's an unfortunate word. It denotes moss-back, reactionary, and old foggyism. How does the word constructive differ? You can say of anyone or any principle that he or it is too conservative, and of course you can label persons or ideas as being too liberal, but you can't defame anyone or any idea by saying that the person or the idea is too constructive. A constructive wants to go forward and to do the best which can be done in all events and at all times. To which do you give more of your attention to these days, your business interest or your political activities? They're not political activities, they are public affair activities. I am nonpartisan, and anything I do along political lines I just do in the hope of getting better people elected to public office and encouraging all officials to serve better. Playboy, didn't you support the MacArthur for President movement in 1952? I supported him in every way I could. As far as I know, I headed the effort. Why do you think he should have been president? MacArthur's rehabilitation of Japan without permitting communist infiltration and his known integrity and mental capacities ensured that his administration as president would have been an outstanding success. General MacArthur was truly the man of this century. If he had been elected in 1952, this would be a completely different world. If you know how close we came to having it, I had a real fine MacArthur for President Committee, headquartered in the Conrad Hilton Hotel in Chicago. About 2 days before the nominating speeches were to be made, I was awakened by Carol Reese, General Wiedemeyer, and other top leaders of the Taft campaign staff, informing me that Senator Taft was transferring his delegate strength to General MacArthur, and that I should alert my committee and get them working. The committee members were delighted to be aroused at 2 a.m. and began redoubling their efforts. But at 6:30 a.m. I was notified that Senator Taft had changed his mind and decided to take one ballot before making the transfer. I knew and told the constructive leaders that one ballot could not be successfully taken, and a stampede toward Ike would develop. Polls revealed that the two war heroes were quite evenly matched in popularity. Therefore, MacArthur, if nominated, would have won as easily as Eisenhower won. Therefore, it may be said that General Douglas MacArthur, who was unwilling to deprive Senator Taft of the nomination, came within 4.5 hours of becoming president, and the free world came within 4.5 hours of being saved. Are you implying that Eisenhower lost the free world? He was an unfortunate choice. He made a lot of mistakes, such as pulling back and not taking Berlin, setting up that city as a tinderbox that might start World War III. His salt-of-the-earth manner enabled him to retain his popularity, dominate Congress, and do great harm. I think he was advised by the same school of advisors that he had advised Franklin Roosevelt and Harry Truman, the same school of thought. What school of thought is that? Alger Hiss, Harry Dexter, White, and Lachlan Curry, who once lived in the White House, and who is now handling United States foreign aid funds in Colombia, can safely be mentioned as being in the early school of presidential advisors. If he looks hard enough, anyone interested can easily ascertain the names of many in this solid phalanx of presidential advisors who supplant the influence of the voters electing a president of the United States. By mentioning Alger Hiss, Harry Dexter White, and Lachlan Curry, do you mean to imply that this school of advisors is leftist in its leanings? Well, they certainly aren't right-wing extremists. You said that Eisenhower had the same school of advisors as Roosevelt and Truman? What did you think of them as presidents? FDR was the first president to institute the struggle of class against class. He managed our entry into World War II after pledging to the mothers of America again and again and again that he would not send their sons into foreign wars. In view of the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, do you think Roosevelt can be taken to task for violating a pledge to the mothers of America? This is a big subject that would require much more time than we have to discuss it. All right, you are giving us your appraisal of Roosevelt as president. In addition to the misjudgments I mentioned, he also broke the two-term tradition, attempted to pack the Supreme Court, and create a myth which must be broken if our country is to survive. What myth? The myth of the indispensable man. What did you think of Truman? Truman knew little and did little, and consequently did not do much harm, except to recall MacArthur. But all presidents since diplomatic recognition of the Soviet Union in 1933 must share the responsibility for the surrender of hundreds of millions of people into communist domination, because the United States has been capable of dictating the policy of the world since before it entered World War II. If anyone tells you that since 1933 the number of human beings dominated by communism has increased from 160 million backward Russians to more than 1 billion human beings, he is not necessarily a right-side extremist crank. It's the duty of the communications media to keep us informed regarding such vital things as this often forgotten subject. What do you think was our last good president? Who do you think was our last good president? I think that Galvin Coolidge turned in the last successful administration. There was no subversive build-up, whatever, in Washington during Coolidge's term in office. As small as the national debt was, he reduced it about 18%. Also, he fulfilled Thomas Jefferson's admonition that the government is best which governs least. President Kennedy was a firm believer in the necessity for a strong federal government. How did you rate him as president? I rated him high enough as a prospect that I supported him. I expected Kennedy to be as constructive as the philosophy of his Catholic religion should lead him to be, and as constructive as the philosophy of his father should cause him to be. How constructive is that? Catholics are known for being anti-communist, and that I had never seen any evidence of fiscal irresponsibility in the Kennedy family. Did Kennedy turn out to be as constructive as you expected? Well, I know that he deplored the betrayal of China to the communists. He once made a very fine speech about it in which he said, "What our young men had saved, our diplomats and our president have frittered away." I was for practically everything that Jack Kennedy did in public life. I think that his assassination was the greatest blow that ever befell the cause of freedom. But Kennedy was a liberal Democrat. Weren't many of his policies contrary to your views? Well, there were a few things he did that were different from my opinions. He made some mistakes, for example, regarding communism, but in general, I thought he was a good official. What mistakes did he make? You've got me. It becomes difficult to try to enumerate particular mistakes which Jack may have made. As a conservative, weren't you disappointed by his endorsement of deficit spending, civil rights legislation, the test ban treaty, and so on? Unless there is a turn toward constitutional government and a decrease in pro-socialist legislation forced through Congress, the Kennedy administration is likely to appear highly constructive when compared to the administrations yet to follow. In what way is President Johnson's legislative program pro-socialist? The administration's program is widely publicized, and everyone is entitled to their own views, whether or not it is pro-socialist. Which of President Johnson's policies do you consider pro-socialist? Nearly all of his domestic policies, I fear. I just don't like the whole big trend toward letting the government do everything. We hear a lot of talk about needing big government because the country is so complex today. It just seems so complex because we have given up so many of the simple, though hard to practice truths that once made sense of our lives. I'd like to see the government less centralized, closer to the people. How would you accomplish that? We could easily abolish a good number of bureaus in favor of private enterprise. I am now rewriting my book, Alpaca, which, in presenting a constitutional for emerging nations, provided for an annual review of bureaus by a permanent bureau review board for the purpose of terminating all bureaus which were no longer required and curtailing the activities of the remaining bureaus as much as practical. What government departments or bureaus do you think should be abolished? All services to the public should be abolished in favor of personal enterprise, where they can be more efficiently and economically performed. How do you feel about the efficiency and economy of the government's war on poverty? I feel that it has been wastefully mismanaged, has undermined confidence, and is a complete failure. Do you think it should be abandoned? If it can't be made workable, yes. Do you feel the same about federal welfare programs? I thought them all right in writing my book, Alpaca, where the people were to try to govern themselves, but they may do more harm than good in the United States. Why? Through mismanagement and the catering for votes and political advantage, they are harming the general public and giving some persons and groups an advantage over others. Do you favor any of President Johnson's Great Society programs? I favor the society with its gradual improvements from July 4th, 1776 up to November 22nd, 1963, which made this the greatest of all nations. The great society is expensive to the nation, and it is at variance with the constantly improving society that made America great. In what way? I think it's robbing a lot of people of the pride of accomplishment and the feeling of self-sufficiency by putting them on the dole. How do you feel about the recent increase in Social Security taxes? The Social Security money paid into the government is illegally spent on other projects. Senator Harry F. Byrd has always said that the Social Security fund was bankrupt. Would you elaborate? Social Security is in the nature of insurance, although it is compulsory, and the diverting of funds from proper reserves to keep Social Security solvent is illegal. They are diverted into the general fund, which underwrites thousands of frivolous projects. Social Security owes hundreds of millions of dollars to the beneficiaries who have paid for insurance and has no reserve from which to pay them. Beneficiaries are dependent upon taxes yet to be collected. According to the Office of Research and Statistics of the Social Security Administration, Social Security tax funds are deposited not in any general fund, but in the Federal Old Age and Survivors Insurance Trust Fund and the Federal Disability Insurance Trust Fund, and can be used only to pay Social Security benefits and administrative expenses. In any case, you'll never need Social Security money yourself. You never can tell. Do you think the present system of graduated income taxes is equitable? I am not a tax expert, and I have not tried to effect any tax reforms. But I take it for granted that the present schedule could be improved. In general, however, I would say it is likely that the more money the government raises, the more poorly it will be administered. You've been quoted as saying that upper bracket taxpayers should have 7 times as many votes as those in the lower 40%. Wouldn't that be unjust, to say the least? This graduated suffrage you are talking about is from the model Constitution in my book Alpaca. I have never suggested that the United States adopt this. Alpaca was written to stimulate people in emerging countries to adopt a constitution whereby they would try to govern themselves instead of yielding to a dictatorship. The purpose of graduated suffrage is to persuade the landed gentry and others close to the powers that be to participate in a republic where otherwise they would not take an equal vote with the less provident. It has often been charged that you and other very wealthy persons like you get oil with paying very... Okay, hold on here. It has often been charged that you and other very wealthy persons like you get off with paying very little in income taxes because of extensive business deductions. What's your reaction to this charge? If I am on trial, I plead not guilty until the charges are made more specific. Doesn't the oil depletion allowance save you several $1 million in taxes every year? I haven't calculated the amount. There's been some talk in Congress about revoking the allowance. How do you feel about that? Depletion allowances are necessary for all irreplaceable resources. Adequate equipment would not be installed if there was no depreciation allowance. Adequate production of irreplaceable resources would not be developed for the benefit of mankind if there was no depletion allowance. Do you think there's much danger of it being eliminated? Not if it is understood. The increased net income for the government from its elimination would finance the government 3 or 4 days per year. Its elimination would be the equivalent of placing an additional tax between the producer and the consumer. The government itself would have to take over the job of drilling and producing oil, and at its costs, which are always prohibitive compared with private business costs under the incentive system. The government would collect far less tax to underwrite these costs than it already does from a healthy oil industry. How much in extra taxes would you have to pay if the depletion allowance were eliminated? Maybe none, for we would have to confine our activities to other business. As I said, the government would have to produce the oil. Wasn't your radio program, Lifeline, a big deduction before its tax exemption was withdrawn last year? Its patrons and those who use it for religious and political education are punished with the loss of Lifeline's tax-exempt status. It was not a tax exemption for me. The cancellation of Lifeline's tax-exempt status as an educational program was due largely to the misinformed and politically inspired actions of Congressman Wright Patman and Senator Maureen Neuberger, who crusaded to bring pressure on Internal Revenue Service because they fear an informed public at the polls. Why would they fear an informed public? Those who do the least good for the populace are those who would like most for the populace to be poorly informed. It's been reported that you endorsed Barry Goldwater's presidential candidacy in 1964. How much good do you think he would have done for the populace as president? My first choices for the Republican nomination were Senator Huruska of Nebraska and Bob Taft Jr., but I couldn't get either of them to make a move. As far as Goldwater is concerned, his campaign was very, very poor, and if he would have made no better a president than he was a campaigner, I don't think he would have been a very good president. His service in the U.S. Senate, however, was the very best. Do you include his vote against the Civil Rights Bill in his appraisal? He was voting his convictions. I know some have tried to infer that Goldwater was anti-Negro because of his vote, but that's not true. He did much for Negroes in Arizona years ago, long before it was a politically popular issue. Contrary to the claims of his campaign managers, the record indicates that Goldwater did little for Negroes in Arizona, either during his years in the Senate or before. But where do you stand on civil rights? That statement regarding Goldwater's record will be interesting to your readers. Regarding my stand on civil rights, my views on the matter are reflected by those of the Negro publisher S.B. Fuller and his great columnist George Schuyler, who ask positions for members of their race only as fast as they are qualified to hold them. What must they do to qualify? To be a bookkeeper, one needs to qualify himself to do the work which a bookkeeper has to do. To be a stenographer, one has to take dictation and type. I believe that nearly any employer will tell an inquirer that he is seeking competent Negro personnel. At the moment, however, there are more positions available than Negroes are qualifying themselves to fill. In regard to the Negro push for equal rights, it should not be forgotten that law-abiding white people are good people and should be treated as such. There are ethnic groups such as Poles and Italians